Trojans Talk Research is a monthly spotlight on the research interests of choice faculty presented by Troy University's Office of Sponsored Programs. This month, Dr. Scott Nokes discusses his research into artificial intelligence applications in the humanities.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kerry Palmer, Senior Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, and I promise you I came over here today to learn from Dr. Nokes. I did not come to introduce him, but he's asked me to introduce him, and I'm happy to do that because I have a tremendous amount of respect for Dr. Scott Nokes. He's been a wonderful colleague in the 5+ years I've been here, and I thought he was a marvelous faculty senate president. I think the most impressive thing that I've ever seen from Dr. Nokes was one day I walked through Smith Hall and had the opportunity to sit down and watch him teach a developmental English class. And when we have our very best and brightest, such as Dr. Nokes, teaching the students that are coming to us with some challenges, that really just says a lot, and it's greatly appreciated. And I learned a lot that day in that classroom, and so I came over here today figuring I'd learn a little more. Will you please help me welcome my esteemed colleague, Dr. Scott Nokes.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Palmer. Okay, so just to let you know, I've removed about a third of what my talk was originally going to be. And the reason for that is, ever since the Office of Sponsored Programs started advertising this, every time I walk across the quad, I get a question about it. And I realized there might be more questions than normally anticipated. So I'm going to take out my little phone here and make sure I leave plenty of time for questions for everyone. Later on, I'm going to talk very, very little about we've put together a grant. I see Dr. Puckett is here, who's involved with that, for an artificial intelligence research center in the humanities. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. At the very, very end, we're going to talk about that. But I just wanted to let you know that although what I'm presenting here, a lot of it is my work, a lot of it is informed by the work of my colleagues who worked on that with me. And we'll see some more at the end, and there'll be a nice little QR code for you to get some information we have there. And the reason I'm calling this AI in the Humanities Beyond Privacy and Plagiarism is that one thing that that very quickly happened, I think, with the advent of ChatGPT, was the possibilities for use in academic dishonesty, and what an issue that's going to be, and actually already is for us. So in point of fact, by that time I'd been using GPT-3, which is the precursor to that, for 3 years, I think, 4 years maybe, I don't know, for some years before that became public, and we were right in the final exam time, and I went to my chair and I said, listen, this could be an issue. What do we want to do? Or we're going to, because we could spook some faculty, and some faculty have been spooked. And said, okay, well, we'll just wait. Maybe the students won't do anything. And in fact, I found for exams, the students didn't do anything wrong that semester. And the next semester they did quite a bit. So today we're actually not going to focus so much on that. I'm going to touch on that very briefly, but we're going to focus on broader issues for the humanities. They're going to affect us on a much higher level. And so I just wanted to pull, these headlines, they're mostly negative, but I just wanted to pull some headlines from the last week about AI. There's this copyright lawsuit that the New York Times is leading with a bunch of other groups against OpenAI. A lot of people had fun this last week with Gemini, which was barred, Google's AI. Its refusal to depict white people, even when they're depicting particular historical figures, decided they couldn't be white anymore. And so people had a lot of fun with that. We'll talk about that a little bit more. This is going to be a big deal for us, which we'll talk about a little bit. So Adobe has unveiled that part of Adobe Pro will involve AI just embedded in the application. NVIDIA's market value was listed at $2 trillion. They're the maker of basically the chips that are used for AI. The news is a little overblown, actually. It was very, very healthy. It's a very, very healthy position for them to be in, for sure. But they were already pretty strong to begin with. And then, of course, Microsoft Copilot, which I suspect will be a part of our plan here at Troy. The point of Microsoft Copilot is supposed to be it prevents you from coming up with false information by really cutting back on what GPT-4 can do, and it's not successful at that. But you can pay $20 a month for it not to be successful at that. So let's start with some simple stuff, because I think, when I talk to faculty, they're at very different levels on this. So just first, what do we mean when we say AI? And so a simple definition is it's a technology that helps machines think and act like people. They can learn from their experiences, recognize objects, understand languages, and make decisions. However, I got a couple older quotes from you. AI is whatever hasn't been done yet. This is from Larry Tesler, not Doug Lynette, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. And every time we figure out a piece of it, it stops being magical. We say, oh, that's just computation. And Rodney Brooks, not Marvin Minsky, said that. And I'll talk about why I say who didn't say that, rather than who did a little bit. Because the truth is, you might have noticed that ChatGPT rolled out, and within maybe 3 months, every application you had suddenly had an AI assistant in it or something like that. And the truth is, we're going to talk about natural language processing later. A lot of those things are actually just something that previously existed, and they slapped a natural language processor on top of it and called it an AI, because there's no rule. You can call anything an AI if you want, right? So some of the things that are being called AIs are not what we would actually normally consider artificial intelligence. In fact, I would say at this point, most of the things that are called that are not really what we'd call that. But we're going to be, for our purposes today, we're going to be very naive about it. We're just going to assume that anything that anybody calls AI that could be reasonable, that we're going to assume that that's it, as long as it's kind of thinking and acting, or appearing to think and act like a human does. All right. So first, some terms. A couple of these are going to come up later on. So you might have known ChatGPT, right? That's probably the first one that really the public became aware of. And what does GPT stand for? And I think the GPT really helps us understand a lot of what's going on with current artificial intelligence. It stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. So what this is, it's a model that is pre-trained on large data sets of text, like books and articles, and allows them to learn statistical patterns in that. And the pre-training is the important part that's going to come up later on and how this is going to affect the humanities. So if I have an AI, it has to be trained first. Otherwise, it's just a blank slate. It needs to be taught certain things, and what I teach it is going to affect the output later on, right? We're going to talk more about that pre-training later. I've already mentioned this term, so it's going to come up a few times. It's NLP, it's natural language processing. And this is really, I would say, the truth is that almost everything that we are calling AI today, really, most of what's being called AI is an advance in natural language processing, not an advance in other things. It's really something that's already been happening that you're very accustomed to doing every day with your computers, but now it has this. And natural language processing is what it sounds like. It learns patterns in the data it's given, so it can accurately interpret user input and generate meaningful responses. So what that means is, if I want to ask my computer to do something, right, I have to ask it in a particular way, right? So if you're a scholar of a certain age, you might remember pre-Windows, you had to enter a particular command into MS-DOS. Some of you are nodding, and others out there are like, what is this wizardry of which he's speaking? And what happened was the kinds of commands we would give them became more and more intuitive. Natural language processing is designed so you don't have to know how to give it a command. You can just say, call up all the emails I have that I got from Lester last week, but not ones that he also sent to Emily. And it will be able to figure out what I want and quickly do that. without me knowing exactly how to command it. Now, could I make my email right now just get me all of those things? Yes, I could. But I kind of had to know how to do it. It's a little bit more awkward. Now, all this comes from something called LLM, which we're not going to talk about much, but you'll see this a lot. And these are large language models. And these are a sophisticated artificial intelligence system that understands, generates, and manipulates human language at a complex level, trained on vast amounts of textual data. So an LLM is trying to use as much pre-existing text as there is to try to really talk like a person. And this is the one that's going to come up a lot. It is going to be a real problem for us. And it's the word hallucinate. I don't like this term, but it is the term of art for this. And it's the tendency of AIs to make up facts or details that look like what would be expected, but are not necessarily true. The reason I don't like this is it pretends like the AI is hallucinating, like it thinks it's true. AI doesn't think anything. The A, artificial, it really means artificial. It really does. It doesn't think anything. But it's trying to present something that looks right, and so it's kind of unintentionally lying to you. It's giving you what it thinks you want, and that's hallucinating. So we're just going to use hallucinate for a term that means like giving you false information. Right. All right. So I wanted to give you this. This is not particular to AI. Some of you may have seen this before. It's the Gartner hype cycle. And this has to do with whenever a new technology, any new technology is introduced. And it's very vague, right? But it gets to the point that as soon as there's a new technology that seems meaningful, it triggers these unbelievable expectations, right? That everything's going to be different tomorrow. Right? Everything's going to be brand new. And then when things don't work out that way, there's this response to that where we're in the trough of disillusionment, where actually this is terrible, it's no good, nothing good's going to come of this, it's stupid. And then eventually all these technologies get into this plateau of productivity where eventually people figure out what AI can do, or what any technology can do, what it can do, what it can't do, right? So one of my favorite versions of this in recent memory is the Segway. Right? Segway, we were going to redesign cities around the Segway. It was going to change everything. And then it became, no, this is a stupid toy. Well, now where do you see Segways? You see Segways in places where having someone with some sort of mobility up a little higher than people. So you'll see cops in cities on Segways, this kind of thing. So they're actually a very productive use. They're not just stupid toys that are useless. But on the other hand, we're not tearing out entire streets of Troy to reorganize them around Segways. So what I would like to do, and really what we talked about doing with the with this Humanities Research Center, I do hope, is to jump past all of this just to get as quickly to the plateau of productivity as we can. I think we're probably past the peak of inflated expectations at this point, that people are starting to think, does this mean anything? And it means something. All right, so let's talk about what's new. All right, again, if you're a scholar of a certain age, you will remember Clippy. So the desire, the young people are like, what is this? In the early iterations of Microsoft Word, there was this figure called Clippy. There was also a clown and a little Einstein and a dog, I think. And Clippy would jump up and you'd start typing something, and Clippy would say something like, it looks like you're writing a threatening email to your neighbor. Would you like me to help you with that? It would jump in and say things like that. And it was terrible, and it never worked right. And Bill Gates had a famous acronym for it. They called it TFC. T was that, and C was clown, not Clippy, because the other one, and you can figure out what the F was. And because it never was right. So this has been a thing which people have wanted for a long time. But here's the thing. You've been using natural language programming, natural language processing, AI, for longer than you have known. Because we've all used Outlook. And these little emails, these little 3 choices it gives you, that was GPT-3 that Microsoft licensed in 2019. So ever since 2019, OpenAI has been reading your emails and helping you decide how to respond to them. And you know how effective these are. I mean, there's just a few things, and usually there's two that are pretty on right, and one's like, I would probably never say that, right? But this has been around for a little bit longer than you have realized. So it's a little less scary than it might appear. Although realizing that for the last half a decade, they've been reading your emails should, maybe that'll alarm you in another way. All right. And so for those of you, I think most of you have used AI before. So this is a sample of an actual text. This is from, I have a little publishing company that publishes medieval scholarship. This one, I think we produced about 2 years ago. And I say an earlier iteration because I can't remember if we did this under GPT-3 or did this under ChatGPT. I think we did under GPT-3. But even in those days, it could produce a pretty good boilerplate text. And so if you go to my little company's website, a huge part of our website is written by artificial intelligence. Not one word of the books we publish is written by artificial intelligence because of their limitations. So they're very good at this kind of like, dumb boilerplate stuff here, but not so good at something that's new and fresh, which is going to be an issue for us in the humanities later on. It's very good at producing natural sounding writing from normal commands. So here's a prompt. I think I gave this one to ChatGPT. I tried to mix up what I was using for this. Write an invitation to a birthday party for 7-year-old kids. The party will be from 3 to 5 on Thursday. It will be cowboy themed. And it comes up with this response, which actually sounds pretty good. Okay? It sounds pretty good. But it's not good at really understanding. It's bad at actually synthesizing information and understanding situations. So let's look at this carefully. It's time for your 7-year-old's birthday party. We're celebrating in style, cowboy style. We'll be gathering at Joe's place. Well, okay, I hope my child's name is Joe. Otherwise, I'm gonna, because I didn't tell it that. Otherwise, I'm going to have to, edit this. I can't just leave it unsuperintended. From 3 to 5 on Thursday. It'll be filled with fun activities like horseshoes, lassoing, hay rides, and more. Well, I didn't tell it that. Am I gonna give these 7-year-olds horseshoes? Have them lassoing one another? Do I have to have a hay ride now? Right? And so when you look at this, you realize that it kind of doesn't understand that's not really something you'd do for a 7-year-old. Or if you did that, you'd do some sort of like child version of it. It didn't ask. It just kind of guessed what I wanted, right? So when you look at its response, it's both a good response and a bad response. It looks very natural until you start to think about it and you say like, well, no, you would be concerned as a parent to find out your child was going to be lassoed by another child. The other thing it's bad at is being creative. There's something called burstiness. I don't want to get into the technical side of this, but it's very limited how much it can vary its writing in other responses. So one of the reasons it tends to want to produce shorter responses is that as it produces more text, it becomes more repetitive. Also, when you're using it to create images, it tends toward a very small set of potential outcomes and needs to be told what to do in very specific ways. So some of you have probably used maybe Midjourney on Discord or something like that. And if you look at it, it is amazing at first, and then you really, really have to work very hard to get it to do something different than what it had done before. So since it's trained on what's out there, it tends toward the most average answers. In the same way the first few pages of a Google search will tend toward the same hits. That's going to be an issue we're going to talk about. So subtext is really difficult for any kind of AI to understand, no matter how you train it. And I like to use the Family Feud analogy. If you've ever seen the game show Family Feud, most game shows you're rewarded for knowing stuff and being smart. Family Feud rewards you for being the most average person you can be. You need to be the most basic person living in the Anaheim, California area because they're just going to keep asking those people whatever the thing is. And this is really, in order to sound like a human, AI is trying to sound like the most average human it can. Well, for the humanities, that is going to be an issue for us in the ways that it gets applied. And so as we're going through this, you have to understand that its strength is in its basicness, in its averageness. And And the more it breaks out from that, the more it fails in what we need it to do. All right, so let's talk. We're going to go through these very quickly because this is not really, we want to get past this. So this is the obvious ethical issues. Academic dishonesty. It is a true statement to say, so while on the fall semester, that those last exams, I don't think I had anyone use AI right as ChatGPT came out. The next semester, I believe I had more students fail for academic dishonesty than any semester prior of my career. And it was because we had, and they almost all did the same thing. They bought a paper off someone who was selling papers on campus, and the people selling papers on campus thought, well, they have no recourse if I just have, an AI write this for me, and they learned their lesson doubly. They paid for it in cash and in a grade. So that is an issue, and this is going to become an even more complicated issue. This is actually not going to get better. We'll talk about that a little bit more a little bit later. Privacy is an issue, and especially an issue for us, because OpenAI and in fact all these other companies that are using, well, for example, you were probably unaware that Microsoft was using GPT-3 to read your emails and give you those helpful responses for for some years now, and it is today, right? The privacy concerns are really an issue for someone like us because these companies hold very close to the vest how they're using this data. Well, we're bound by FERPA laws. So anything I would put in something that has an AI has the potential for us of violating FERPA laws. And the problem is we don't know where that is going. And this is going to become a bigger problem for us as more and more of the normal systems we use are using these kinds of AI. So privacy is going to be an issue. And also something we're already experiencing here is scams, right? The ability to, we've seen some big headlines about this. The ability to impersonate a particular person is really troubling. But it would be very easy to impersonate an institution, to a student, for example. And so these are things we're going to be concerned about. Now I'm going to breeze past those because those are the kinds of things that already people are talking about a lot, and we've got committees that are working on thinking about these. I want to move more toward some other things. We're also going to breeze through these quick because they're not specific to humanities, but ownership over image. And notice I said image, not images, because we're going to talk about images when it comes to the arts. Who owns my image? What happens if someone puts my image onto and manipulates it using artificial intelligence? And so we saw recently what was the big sticking point of the Hollywood the actor strike. This was not the networks. The studios wanted to be able to use these images of extras, after a film was done in other movies. And the extras didn't want to be used for free, basically, after that. And to some degree, it's understandable on both sides. You could see not wanting to go in and get paid the day rate and then be in 1,000 movies after that. But on the other hand, there are some shows that were really huge in the 1980s that you cannot find on streaming today. And the reason you can't find them on streaming is because the way that music was licensed for television was different, and it's almost impossible to get the streaming rights for every individual episode. So the studios were bit by that, right? So all of this has to do with all that kind of stuff. And so this is going to be, we're going to have real ethical issues. Revenge porn, and when I talk about revenge porn here, normally we think about revenge porn as, someone photographs themselves and then their romantic partner in anger releases that. Well, there's no need for that, because no one need to photograph anything. In fact, I put this together, and then the next day I saw a headline that said that there was a middle school, I think it's Beverly Hills Middle School, where the kids were making AI porn videos of their classmates. And so, you don't actually have to have been involved in the activity to appear to have been, and even if everyone knows it is not really you, it's still embarrassing to have a picture of you sitting on the toilet or whatever this kind of thing is. And so we're going to be dealing a lot, this has to do with this idea of image, right? And the last one here is associated with that, and this is Lolly, which has been an issue. This just touches on a broader thing, but child pornography, we frown on that. And one reason we do is because it harms children. And some people can make a claim, well, there are no children involved in this. These are artificially intelligent, they are just simply depicting children, and there were no children. And it might not even be a particular child, like in this middle school, right? It can simply be, make me a fake child who never existed in the world. And then we have to think about, like, well, how ethically, I mean, there's the ick factor, right? But how ethically do we think about this, right? So you can imagine someone, some therapist, for example, saying, like, this is how my client is coping with these desires to not harm a child, right? To not harm an actual child. And then, like, okay, well, what do we do with that information? Like, how do we deal with it ethically? So these are sticky things. Relationships this is going to be a big one. It's going to affect us all. Right? AI friends and romance, right? This is already starting to be a bit of an issue. I think we are all aware that our students really struggle with making friendships and romantic connections. And they are supplementing that with artificial intelligence. That's not going to decrease, that's going to increase. We also have these things, grief tech, which is a little creepy. I shouldn't say that because maybe someone here has done this, but Hereafter is a company that does this, and what they do is maybe you're a grandparent and you record a bunch of things about yourself, and then your grandchild, when you pass on, or whomever, can then talk to dead you, right? An AI that's doing, this is not like something that could happen, this is like what's actually being sold right now. And of course, we have therapy apps where you might never actually be communicating with another person. And you could see where that could be helpful, especially in situations where people can't afford a therapist. But you could also see real potential downsides. So I just wanted to throw these out there as things which are going to touch on the humanities. Now, there are two big issues that are going to underlie everything with with AI, and that is power and power. Right? So there are certain cultural presuppositions that powerful people have, the people who are making these AIs have. So first of all, you may notice that AI tends to be very American focused. Why? Well, because they're being pre-trained on existing data. And right now, American popular culture, America has the strongest internet presence. Just go down the list of the things you would feed into to pre-train AI, it tends to be very American. Also tends to be English speaking. Truly, there are actually only a handful of languages at the moment that really you can do effective things with an AI. And then finally, these tend to be culturally and politically elite. So for example, there was this, I don't know if you'd call it a scandal, because it was also used for fun, but this problem Google had with Gemini, where it wouldn't show white people. And a lot of people, the presupposition was, I think, that Google put its thumb on the scale and said, whatever you do, don't ever show a white person. And that could be part of it. But I think actually more of what we see when we see these kinds of things, because that one was obvious because it's visible, right? You can just see it, right? But more, I think it's the cultural presuppositions of people who went to basically a half a dozen particular elite universities and maybe 24 particular prep schools. One point I like to make is that until John Roberts came on the Supreme Court, before him, every single Supreme Court justice had gone through Harvard Law School in the same decade, which meant there was a lot of agreement because they had the same, 4 professors, right? And this really affected American law, right? We're kind of in that same situation here with AI, where there's a very small handful of people are thinking about things. So, in fact, things that we might look at as a kind of weird elite cultural bias, well, if you're already in that group, it just seems normal to you. And you're training it to be good and normal, like you are, to replicate a human, like you, right? The other thing is that processing costs can be in the millions per year for the institution like Troy. And these numbers are going to be very vague because, once again, these companies are very secretive about this. So, for example, the best numbers we can get about how much power it actually takes to run the GPUs that are necessary, the graphic processing units for the cloud hardware rental, if you're training up your AI, is about 5 times as much. And we get that data from, not from those who are selling it, because they don't want to tell you. We get it from basically calculating how much more NVIDIA hardware it's taking and how much more energy that takes, is essentially how it works. So these numbers are very vague. We just know that pre-training can be very expensive. Now, for a large institution, we're going to be able to find some way to afford it, especially if it's important. But a small institution, an institution not in the developed world, if you already can't afford, dry erase boards, good luck at affording, good luck at paying for, GPU cloud processing that charges by the minute. That's going to be a lot more challenging. All right, so let's talk about the normal long-term effects of technological change. Because at the end of this, I want to talk really long-term. Look, the 15th century, we had the printing press, and it starts producing texts. And it leads to all sorts of changes that at that time people didn't really understand, right? Universal education, literacy, democracy, and religious wars. All these things, basically, good and bad. It transforms society. I don't know about your background, but I can promise you that someone of my background would not have been literate before the printing press. I'm just too poor. So it would have been impossible for that to happen. And now, not only am I literate, but I teach literacy, et cetera, right? And that technology made that possible. This also allowed in literature, I'm going to hit on literature a little bit more than normal because that's my jam and you'll have to deal with that. The novel, the essay, the periodical, newspapers, magazines, these things can only exist after the printing press is invented. They literally cannot exist before that time. So we can expect long-term effects of artificial intelligence that don't just change the work in computing, but change the very ways in which society functions. Again, that's going to hit us pretty hard here. All right. We have a concept that is very important in literary theory called the death of the author. Roland Barthes declared the death of the author. Basically, the argument is, look, once a text is written, what the author intended doesn't matter. Well, now, the intent of the author is none. The author has no intent, right? The author has no will. The author's intelligence itself is, in fact, artificial, right? This is basically the equivalent of, a million monkeys and a million typewriters until one of them types something knowledgeable, and then you say, okay, there it goes. You get that. So that in 2023, Clark's World Science Fiction magazine had to shut down submissions because they were just getting so many that were AI generated. All right. So I'm very sorry for this. The next 2 slides are going to be a lot of theory. My apologies. Okay. The first one is something called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. And this is that since language is the medium of thought, but this is not particular to AI. This is a kind of older linguistic idea. Language limits and determines what we can think. So what you can think is determined by your language. And so, there are certain things that you can say today that you could not say maybe 30 years ago because you didn't have a concept for it. You didn't have a way of talking about the thing. And as soon as you have a way of talking about the thing, it then gives you new ways of thinking about it. And as soon as you come up with a new idea, if you're going to publish a new idea, what do you have to do? You got to put a label on it so people after you can talk about it, right? So language is mediated through thought, and thought is mediated through language on a very, very, very deep level. And really, the debate about this has to do how deep into the grammar this goes, because I think no one would say, it's impossible to think a thought that you don't already have a term for, because of course, then we'd never have new thoughts. We could never have new terms. But on the other hand, if I said, if the reverse, that this can't possibly be true, well, we all, I think everyone here knows that you've learned a new term, and it's changed the way you thought about things. It made it easier to express it and think more deeply about it, right? So in fact, the controversy over this is to what degree it's true. But it is to some degree true. We're going to come back to this in a minute. All right, so there's a theorist called Donna Haraway came up with this idea of the cyborg manifesto. And I would say that I 80% disagree with her, but the 20% that she gets right, she gets very right. And this idea is that we create tools to adapt the world to us, but then we adapt ourselves to the tools themselves. And we become, essentially the tools become part of who we are. And so she used the word cyborg because she's being very edgy, right? Got an artificial hip? You're a cyborg, right? Glasses or contact lenses? Well, look at you. You're wearing or have embedded in your body machinery. You're a cyborg. Use a machine to move about the world. Did you walk here today? Or did you use a machine to get here in some way? I'm guessing you used a machine because you are indeed a cyborg. Do you have the inability to, this is not in hers, but do you have the, because she's too old, the inability to carry out daily functions without your phone? You are then a cyborg, right? To the degree that we had a day, was it last year or 2 years, where like the internet was basically down on campus for a day, and everybody went home. Because we're like, what can we do? We literally can't work. Now somehow, we could all function 20 years earlier without that. But now we literally couldn't function. We had adapted to our tools, right? All right, so, and then we add the third problem, which is the Ouroboros problem. This is the snake that's swallowing its own. Is it grossing you out because there's a giant snake on there? By the way, I used Midjourney to produce this. I tried to get Midjourney to give me a robot snake, so it would have been less gross, but it somehow looked more gross, so you're welcome. And it's an Ouroboros is a snake that's swallowing its own tail. So a lot of people are pointing to Google today and saying that Google's struggling because it's just not the company it was. But in some ways, it has a bigger problem. That's the Ouroboros problem. The front page of Google doesn't work anymore. It's frozen. It just gives you the same thing over and over again. Why is that? Well, at the beginning, when Google started their searches, it was, back when Yahoo was ruling the earth. Google, what they did was they said, well, we will link to whatever whoever takes those words and links it to a certain area the most. That's how we're going to stack these things, right? And it was revolutionary because it meant that suddenly your computer knew what most people were looking for and therefore what you were looking for. Well, fast forward a decade and a half, and everyone who's linked past that time has linked to what they found in the first couple pages of Google. And so they're struggling with the problem. They're trying to do things by playing with recency and other things. It's just frozen. It's broken. And so if you want to know what time Burger King opens up, it's got you there. But if you want to know anything that is less stable than that, it's very, very hard to find that information. You have to use a lot of real weird information. Well, what happens long term when more and more of what we produce is being produced using AI? And the AI is now being trained on text that it itself produced, believing that to be the way that humans communicate because we publish that. So we put these three things together and we end up with some real implications here that are going to affect us all. Humans are going to begin to think, speak, and write like artificial intelligence. Now, how strong that is going to depend on a lot of things. And what that looks like is going to depend on a lot of things. But we're kind of stuck with this as an outcome. Now, we might just simply run in that direction, right? So like we had the Industrial Revolution. We do now talk and act like machines more than we did before the Industrial Revolution, but that doesn't mean we all dance the robot every day. What it means is we talk about social engineering and human resources, right? We talk about people, and we conceive of society as a machine that we can pull the levers of and make move. This is not an idea that really existed before the Industrial Revolution. And so we can assume that we're going to, in some ways, similarly change the way that we think about the humanities based upon these same kinds of effects, right? Okay, I said it. Well, I'm glad I cut this because I'm really going long. All right, so I'm going to go through some things really quickly because I have a sense from the expressions out there we may have some questions and comments. So first, let's talk about the short-term implications for arts and humanities. And when I say short-term, I mean I'm really here thinking 2 years. I'm not thinking 30 years, okay? As AI becomes embedded in typical applications, the distinction between AI produced and human produced will become blurrier. Adobe is already putting AI text in their Adobe Pro, right? Microsoft is very aggressively producing, promoting Copilot, which my opinion is not a good product. It's a terrible product, in fact, but I'm confident that we will adopt it nonetheless because, well, if Microsoft's going to do it, if they screw up, we can blame Microsoft and not ourselves. So right now, a student turns something in. How did they get that paper written by AI? They literally logged into something that calls itself an AI, right? They logged into GPT-4 or Rumi or Poe or whatever the one is that they decide to use. And then it produces this kind of boring, technically correct, but kind of boring and stupid text, right? But what happens when they're just using Word? And it's starting to finish things for them. That's not something that's happening in 10 years or 5 years. That's something that's happening, well, if they're paying $20 a month now. And so we ourselves are going to be using these same products. And so that line is going to become blurrier. And so the battle, there's this idea that there's this arms race between AI detection and AI. That fight is not even there because what's going to happen is the distinction is going to disappear, and it's going to disappear tomorrow very quickly. Okay. Scut work of the humanities. If you're indexing your book, stop it. Okay. That dumb work, examining large data sets, producing visualizations, that can be outsourced to AI. Think of how much of your time doing research in the humanities is spent doing kind of dumb work that a talking monkey could do, right? You don't have to do that. An AI can do that and can do it pretty well. It does have to be superintended. Okay, you do have to spot check it, make sure it's not screwing some things up. But that kind of thing, we will spend much less time, if at all, on that. I think probably more likely some things, I don't think this is currently in Copilot, but some things that you could see, for example, in Copilot is you just write up your thing, you put in who said it, and at the end you realize, oh, it's already produced a works cited page. I didn't even put the citation there. I just said, as Smith said in 2017, and there it is, because it knows the quote, right? A lot of that scut work is going to be handled for you. That will be good. But writing on familiar humanities topics is going to become more uniform. This is the Ouroboros problem, right? It's trying to sound normal. It's trying to come up with the most average answer it can. So if you're writing about something that is humanities, it's trying to give you what would most people say, because that's what it normally wants. That's what you really want, right? And so unfortunately, even on the scholarly level, our writing we're going to have to fight against ending up with the same output over and over again. Crafting the right query is going to become an essential skill. Now, those of you who already have to work with our internal systems here will know, for example, if you ask us, how many freshmen do we have at Troy University? Well, it entirely depends on how you craft the query, right? And we've all been in meetings, well, not all of us maybe, but if you haven't, blessings on you. Been in meetings where we've discovered that the query, it looks like there's been a 4% decline in our freshman class, and we can't believe it. And then we realize, oh, we crafted the query differently. In fact, there's almost no difference or something, right? That's going to become a bigger issue with AI. Because if you ask the question in a slightly different way, it's going to tend to give you the same answer over and over again. And so often, it's really trying to figure out what you want. Research, both student and scholar, will tend toward the same results because of that. Right? You craft the query wrong, you're going to get a different result. It's going to tend toward the same results. And hallucinations will quickly become established facts. Now, I don't know everybody's field here, but I'm pretty sure that everybody here knows there's some fact in your field that everyone knows that is in fact not true. But everyone knows it. It doesn't matter how many times people have said it's just not true, and said it to other scholars who know it's not true, you still behave as if it's true. Right? So one of my favorite ones is Lord Acton, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's not about the powerful. In this context, that's about people appealing to the powerful. That's not about the powerful person, that's about you. Being near a powerful person caused you to act in a corrupt way, right? Like, oh shoot, that wasn't what I thought at all. Doesn't matter how many times people point that out, we still hear it the same way. And so we are going to have to fight with these things ourselves. And because those facts will be read by the AI, it will continue to spit them out as the truth, because it thinks they're the truth. All right, long-term implications. We're going to see new genres of art and literature that don't exist. I can't tell you what those are going to be, because I would not have guessed the novel or the essay or newspapers, right, before the printing press. Certain languages will become more privileged, while others will become less visible. It would be nice to believe that this time it's going to work out the other way, right? That this time it's going to mean that a language that only has 20,000 speakers is now going to get a new lease on life. But the truth is, it's not going to have a large enough data set to be picked up by AI, and so it's going to get ignored. And things existing in privileged languages today where there are large data sets are going to become privileged for that reason, more privileged. As different AIs are trained on different cultural data sets, they'll develop different values and presuppositions. In a way that I think we don't appreciate in America, China, for example, has a completely different internet than we have. Europe has a different internet than we have. I'm sure if we've done any cross-border work at all, we're all aware that Canada has a much more restricted internet, because you'll get like emails from Canadians saying, hey, could you send me this? Because we're not allowed to have it in Canada. We think about Canada as right next door. Very different. These different places are going to have different AIs that are trained on data from their culture, and therefore they're going to have very different values. Very different values from one another, and very different values from ones that we would like. Certain data is going to be hidden because AI is not going to understand when it's wanted because of the failure to understand subtext. Often, so it's not like Gemini thought, no matter what, no one ever wants to see a white person unless they have red hair. That was the one exception. If you had somebody with red hair to give you a white person. Nobody wants to see AI. It wasn't that. It was that it was hiding those things because it was kind of under the impression that it wasn't what was desired, right? And so that's something that's visible, but we will have data, we'll have books, we'll have things, information we have that because it doesn't understand the subtext, it won't know to look for it. And so it'll suppress that just because it doesn't think you want it. Information that's not found in summaries will not be understood and known by future scholars. And I hate to say this, but it is the truth. Look, I'm an English professor, and so we read a lot. And so but I suspect that some of my colleagues in some other fields that aren't so in love with reading will see a 30-page article and would rather say to the AI, give me the one-paragraph executive summary of this. Which is fine, right? Which is fine as far as it goes, but what the net result will be that you will never see the fine details of most of the things that you look at. And thus, that information is going to be lost. Right? It's something we're all going to have to guard against, but I think culturally, the next generation is going to lean into that probably. And then finally, I want to end the long-term implications for arts and humanities. Surprising discoveries are going to be made by novel linkages of ideas from disparate academic fields. This is one of the things that's very valuable. The same idea that says, like, well, I'm just going to look at this summary here. Well, you know what? I can be a real expert in my subfield, but I might not be able to be an expert in another field. But I can pull that data and get it understood. And there are things that we're going to be able to discover that we can't now. All right, before we go, I wanted to pretend to be William Gibson and give you some long-term implications generally. Difficult social interactions will be outsourced to AI. Have you ever had to fire someone? I have. You and I much prefer? Have an AI call them up and fire them for me, so I don't have to have that conversation. If we're real lucky, my AI will talk to their AI. We never have to deal with it. All right. We'll find it more difficult to deal with disagreeable people. We already see this now, right? Of our students being unable to deal with someone. When I say disagreeable, I don't even mean like wildly disagreeable, just anxiety about dealing with someone in what older people consider a normal interaction. If most of what you're interacting with all day are AIs that are trying to be kind to you, that are really just trying to be polite to you or trying to give you what you want, other humans who have other desires, it's going to look different. Humans are going to become more easily dehumanized. Dan Puckett, and the non-human will become more easily anthropomorphized, right? This is going to be it's going to be easy, right? When it's much harder, and we already, again, are seeing this, right? Take Tinder, for example, and all of its spawn, not literal spawn. It literally was an attempt to turn humans into playing cards that you either discard or you keep in your hand, right? That was the idea. And the outcome is obvious, right? That romantic partners have become dehumanized in that way. Celebrities have become even more artificially acceptable. You want to talk to Taylor Swift? Her bot will talk to you, right? And it'll sound just like her and talk and say what she wants to say, but it will again be an artificial version of her, right? So it will never, you won't, and it'll be hard to kind of distinguish between those. We're going to begin to see our AIs as extensions of ourselves. I think we're going to move from these vast, you log in someplace, and instead we're likely to have our own private AIs, each of us, that's trained on our stuff, which will be good for some ways, but we're going to start to see those extensions of ourselves. So people may become liable for the behavior of their personal AIs. Right? So if my AI orders something for me online, I guess I just bought that. Right? Or if my AI, because I've been so angry at someone, calls them up and, or won't call them, but makes a threatening, sends them a threatening message, well, guess who just sent that to them? Me. But the reverse is true. AI hacking, which we already see happening, will be seen a deep violation of the self. I think we're going to see people hacking in your AI and making it do things, your personal AI, the way we feel about home invasions today. That kind of violation. Like, how dare you? That's me in there. All right, so before I open up for questions, because I ran very, very, very long, this is the team, Dan is here, that worked on the Troy Humanities Research Center on AI, which is not actually, that is the name. And we actually put together a short reading list, and that QR code right there will give you a PDF printout of a very short reading list that instead of having a bunch of, it is not full of like scare headlines, this is instead scholarly articles and such. Now, this is useful today. This is not useful in a couple years probably, because the first scholarly article written on ChatGPT was written 14 months, the first peer-reviewed scholarly article on ChatGPT was published 14 months ago. So we're still in the infancy of this. But this gives you a good starting point. It's got, many pages of material.